the European Investment Bank, by the CAF, the Development Bank of Latin America, World Bank, and other partners. And we want to look ahead. We want to pitch this forward and look at what's up next, including COP26 in Scotland, plus the World Water Forum in Dakar next year. And I've covered a number of events, either as a journalist for Euronews, for CNN. I moderated a Water and Beyond conference, a 4-day conference at the beginning of this year. And this was part of it, this idea that it's almost like a Rube Goldberg connection between development, biodiversity, migration, as a catalyst for cooperation, as a way to perhaps avoid conflicts. And so this is very important. The agenda over this next hour is we want to do a poll with you, all the listeners and viewers. We'll have some keynotes, presentations, closing remarks, and to know that we have a lot of speakers because this is a vast issue. So we want to try to keep to time if we can. Tech tips, hashtags, keep in mind the hashtags when you hear something great. Hashtag Water Finance Coalition, hashtag Finance in Common 2021. And questions, we'll try to get to some questions during this, put them in the Zoom chat. Let us begin with a poll if we can. And this is the question for all of you to vote. According to you, what is the average percentage of investments dedicated to water and sanitation among public development banks? All right, there's the question. Is it 1 to 5%? Is it 5 to 15%? Or 15 to 25%? And you can put them in there through these two ways to do it. Let's give you about a minute for that. What is the average percentage of investments dedicated to water and sanitation among public development banks? And I was surprised by the answer. I think it's quite surprising. And as you're voting, we are going to go quickly after the vote to UNICEF. Henrietta Fore, Executive Director of UNICEF. Let's see what we got now. All right, 1 to 5%, 5 to 15. So the majority think 5 to 15, but no more than that. And you know what? You're right. The answer is depends. It goes up to 15%, but no more than that. So that's very interesting. But water and sanitation alone being 15%, maybe you could say glass half full, right? Anyway, very interesting that many of you are quite informed on this. And let's move quickly then to the keynote, a keynote talk by Henrietta Fore, the Executive Director of UNICEF, United Nations Children Fund, on the many reasons to invest in water. It's a heart of the balances of the ecosystem in society, water being an essential factor in biodiversity, food security, health, dignity, even peace. So Henrietta, please tell us.
Thank you very much, Chris. And it's a pleasure to be with you. And we are looking ahead, just as you said, Chris. So UNICEF and our partners feel very strongly that we need to urgently accelerate progress in water, in sanitation, and in hygiene services. Through a combination of population growth, changes in lifestyles, and climate change, as well as freshwater resources around the world, they have come under significant strain, both in terms of availability and quality. Nearly 4 billion people live in areas affected by water shortages, and 80% of the wastewater globally is discharged into the natural environment without treatment. More than 2 billion people do not have access to quality drinking water at home, and more than 1 in 2 people live without safely managed sanitation services. Each year, 840,000 people, including 300,000 children, die from easily preventable diarrheal diseases. The benefits of access to safe water, sanitation, and hygiene are impossible to refute. They are essential for good health, for gender equality, for dignity, and for social progress. Water and sanitation are closely linked to food security, playing a critical role in agricultural production and the nutrient cycle. Responsible water use helps to maintain biodiversity and balance our increasingly fragile ecosystems. There is also a strong connection between water and peace. Our Water Under Fire report shows real examples of parties to conflict controlling or destroying water resources as a weapon of war. Meanwhile, the transboundary dialogues around water resources occur every day and help to strengthen lasting peace between nations. SDG 6 envisions safe drinking water and sanitation services for everyone around the world, and UNICEF works with governments and partners to increase financing in support of this goal with a particular emphasis on children. We know, for example, that governments need strong WASH policies, strategies, planning processes, and sector monitoring. And that is why nearly 90 countries that UNICEF plays a lead role in coordinating with the water and sanitation partners to strengthen service delivery. Across the globe, UNICEF and our partners use evidence to develop strong financing cases for use by the development banks. Together with WHO, UNICEF has proposed a framework and a methodology for assessing the affordability of WASH to support country assessments and global monitoring. In addition, we are supporting microfinance institutions, lending to poor and low-income households for toilets. The key to reaching households in microfinance is geographical coverage, low interest rates, and low demands for collateral, which public banks are in a strong position to do. To generate financing for WASH services, it is critical to develop links with national ministries of planning, finance, and budget. UNICEF is proud to host Sanitation and Water for All partnership to bring this issue to the highest levels of government, including the ministers of finance. And our next speakers will touch on this. We know that we need to reach more people, and children especially, with life-saving and sustainable solutions for water, sanitation, and hygiene services. At UNICEF, we are proud to be part of the effort to accelerate progress on SDG 6 through helping create sustainable solutions for children, for families, and for communities in need. With the right leadership on access to WASH services and responsible water source management, we can make the world a healthier place for all. We can also help mitigate the impact of climate change, conflict, disease, and pandemics. But we can only do this by joining forces. So the time to act is now. I wish everyone here a very fruitful conversation. And Chris, I hand it back to you. Thank you very much.
Henrietta, thank you so much. I know you have to leave us right now. I have a million questions, but some other event will do that. Anyway, thanks very much to you. Thank you. Let us move on to the next talk by Katarina De Albuquerque. She is with Sanitation and Water for All, and she's going to be talking about this, the needs, the financing gap, the need for political willingness to make this happen. Let's hear from Katarina.
Distinguished ladies and gentlemen, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending on the part of the globe where you are right now. It's a pleasure to address you on this important topic of finance. There is no doubt that financing is a key bottleneck when we talk about access to water, sanitation, and hygiene. You have heard the numbers. A quadrupling of our current rate of progress is needed to achieve universal access to sanitation, water, and hygiene by 2030. And this number varies according to the context and to the place where you live. So the efforts can be much bigger if you live in a country that is severely affected by climate change, or if you live in a country that is in a humanitarian setting. Without serious attention to financing, how will we achieve such acceleration? COVID-19 has underlined that investing in water, sanitation, and hygiene is everyone's business. scaling up financing and mobilizing additional resources for water, for sanitation, and for hygiene will enable us to advance a sustainable recovery from the current pandemic. It is thus not only a social, but also a truly economic imperative. Yet, despite this, we are still falling short in mobilizing resources. Current estimate investment levels are far from what is needed. We need in excess of 114 billion US dollars each year for infrastructures. We even need more if we want to put in place the enabling environment, the good governance systems that will make the sector strive. Also, we would need to add to these 114 billion if we want to make sure that everything that we build and do is climate resilient. So resources from the private sector continues to remain very limited, even in blended schemes in our sector. We are faced with the reality of ever worsening climate change. Water and sanitation have a key role to play as part of the solution and not only as part of the problem. Yet climate finance mobilized for these basic rights, these basic services, and also for adaptation measures more broadly, continues to be unacceptably low. Only a minor share, estimated at 3% of tracked flows, are going towards investments in water and sanitation. So what will it take to mobilize the needed billions to reach the water and sanitation related SDGs as well as climate goals? First, we need public investments. International and national, or I would say national and international, public development banks need to scale up financing to the sector and increase their footprint. Such investments will provide a good return from a social, economic, and environmental perspective, a smart investment in sustainable development. Number two, second, scale up private financing. Investments in improved water supply sources and sanitation facilities can be good value for money. Yet investments from private sources has not met its full potential. To achieve SDG 6, we need the private sector on board, including through innovative financing mechanisms. Governments must also do their part to create the investment environment to attract and retain private sector investment. Third, we must increase climate finance for water and sanitation. I mentioned already the unacceptably low numbers. As we prepare for COP26, water and sanitation need to be amplified as a key priority. We need to work together to grow the climate finance pie, slice it fairly so that more resources are directed towards adaptation measures, and ensure that climate resilient water and sanitation is more systematically treated as part of the solution. And finally, fourth, for all of the above, we do need political will. Generating the momentum for increasing investments across public, private, and climate finance will only happen with deliberate decisions by leaders. With solid evidence and strong advocacy, we can and must create the political determination to actually deliver on the promise of universal access and the human rights to water and sanitation. Thank you so much for your attention.
Great, our thanks to Katarina. I want to move quickly now to Lyonel Rouve, who is with Suez. Lyonel, we just heard about this financing gap, and obviously we can't do this without the private sector, but the private sector actually needs some certain conditions for this to work. Can you quickly hit on a couple of points on that?
Good afternoon to all, and thank you, Chris, and thank you to give me the opportunity to share experience on that. Yes, that's a very important point, and actually we're facing an incredible paradox today, because there is a mismatch between, on the one hand, huge needs in terms of infra investment, which was mentioned with a lot of energy by Katarina, and on the other hand, an excess of cash raised by the funds, which do not translate into concrete projects. So how do we do? How do we turn it into reality? Maybe what I'd like to do with you today is to share my own experience as a private player. When we look at projects, what are the key leverages of the go, no go decision? So I will be sharing my experience on that and to share that with all of you. Basically, you've got three questions before a go decision. The first one is the project affordable? Meaning, does the project really exist? And I come back on that. The second question is about the risk and the risk management. Is it a high risk profile or low risk profile? And obviously for private players, this is not the same reply we may have for the project. And the third one, which is as important as the first two ones, is can we bring added value to people and to our clients? So I start with the first one. The first one is about the affordable.
And Lyonel, if I might just jump in very quickly, we are way behind time. So if you can make this as tight as you can, and tell us where it works for Suez by fitting these three parameters. How does that work for Suez? Is there a project, maybe for instance, in Tunisia, where this does work? Because we have to make this very, very short.
Yeah, sure. I would make it short, but for instance, I would give you one example of a project in Tunisia we have worked on. This is a long-term for wastewater contract. And that was very interesting because World Bank was very much involved at the very beginning of the project with the Tunisian bodies, regulatory bodies, so that the whole scheme was put in place in terms of clear and sustainable governance, to a financing scheme with a tariff which does translate the water and sanitation policy from the clients with a global supervision by the World Bank.
Yeah.
And three, there were some mechanisms, some tools, I put it this way, securing the payment, not only on the construction part, but also over the O&M period, meaning that for long-term investors, as we are, to have security in terms of payment over a long-term period, securing the operation of the networks is something which is very key and make us a go decision very quickly.
And this is very important where if the private sector like Suez can share in the risk with public development banks, then it works, right?
Yeah, actually, it's a three parties. We got the PDBs on the one side with a lot of power because they can share best practice amongst the world with one given country on some regulatory bodies, whether it's through a tariff mechanism, whether it's through security payments and guarantees and so on. We've got the clients, and what is key from the client is that he's got a clear assessment of his needs and his capacity of financing. And again, PBDs are key to this extent. And we, as private player, we don't only bring financing, but the value on the whole water life cycle management. And this is very important because what's worth financing a construction of a plant if it is not well operated, if we got a lot of leakages thereafter?
Yeah.
So all that is a global effort for common benefits.
And I'm aware of the situation where I think I've seen in some of your notes is that that utilities face low revenues from the rates they charge. That's very difficult, especially in developing countries. So there's minimal return, long payback periods. How do you help to close that gap or to fix that gap? How can you help from the private sector side?
What's important to us is to have a long-term perspective, as I was saying. When we invest, the payback of such contracts is very long. Just to give a rough idea, if we consider a 20 years contract, the payback is most of the time after the half of the contract lifetime. So long-term view, meaning that sustainability of the governance, sustainability of the local policy is something very key, very key. If anything is happening before the payback, we're losing a lot of money, then it's a no-go decision.
Yeah.
So long-term perspective. Two, clear scope of works between the public bodies and the private players, meaning that the PPP scheme, the regulatory scheme, meeting the duties and responsibilities of each party is very important. Clarity. We need clarity. We don't want to have something which is not clear. So clarity is
Right.
the second thing, and sustainability of governance is very key.
Okay, I would love to come back to you, Lyonel, so I hope you can stay on, but I want to move to the other speakers as quickly as we can, so we can make sure everybody gets on the dance floor here. So thank you very much, Lyonel, stay on. Very important points to hear from the private sector, a bit of a reality check from that side. And now let's hear a recorded message from Ambroise Fayolle on framing the solution, introducing this rationale of the Water Finance Coalition that was established last year after this summit. Let's hear from Ambroise.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. On behalf of the European Investment Bank and the Water Finance Coalition partners, I would like to thank you very much for attending this high-level session. I would especially like to thank GDP for the organization and our co-organizer, AFD, the French Development Agency. Climate change is a reality. We all witnessed it during the summer. Heat waves, flooding, and droughts all over the world. This was also confirmed by the latest IPCC report in August 2021. This is having a critical impact on water resources. EIB, as the EU Climate Bank, has aligned all its financing activities with the goal and principles of the Paris Agreement in 2021. In addition, the EIB will increase its support to climate action and environmental sustainability to exceed 50% of its overall lending by 2025. For the European Investment Bank, investing in water and sanitation is a critical part of the Climate Bank roadmap. In 2020, we signed close to 4 billion euros in the water sector. The impact of these projects will be notable. They will significantly increase the resilience to climate change. In addition, they will improve the access to sanitation for more than 15 million people and increase the access to safe drinking water to almost 30 million people. However, we are conscious that this is just a drop of the global needs. As mentioned earlier in the session, there won't be any sustainable and inclusive future without water and sanitation for all. Public development banks should put all their efforts in orienting investment toward SDGs, and in particular SDG 6. The 2020 FIC Summit constituted of a first step to recognize their unique role to build bridges between government and the private sector, between international and national agendas, between short-term and long-term priorities. The ambitions of the FIC, the Financial Income Summit, translated into multiple thematic initiatives. For water, a call for action towards the Water Finance Coalition was launched by EFD together with EIB, CAF, and other partners. The water sector is underfinanced for being too capital intensive, with a challenging risk profile that is often worsened by governance inefficiencies. This is precisely where public development banks have a role to play. Public financial institutions have proven that they can provide the patient capital needed for these public investments and be a catalyst to crowding finance from the private sector. Public development banks are able to provide a variety of financing products at better terms than commercial banks, particularly to utilities and local governments. In contexts where demand and offer of financing do not spontaneously meet, they can provide assistance to build business cases and prepare projects. They can take part in the governance dialogue to strengthen the sector's enabling environment. Historically, national public development banks have played a significant role in water in high-income countries. Still, their involvement in the sector is far from reaching its full potential. The Water Finance Coalition was created to help public development banks tap their potential for the water sector. This coalition aims to inspiring each other, whether we are international, regional, or national public development banks, and to build on our complementarities. It also looks at building knowledge and tools to promote the mobilization of public development banks. The objective is to mainstream water and sanitation in public development bank strategies, especially as far as climate and biodiversity are concerned. Therefore, I'm glad and honored that the coalition can present today its one-year work to such a large audience. Together, I hope that we can build on this momentum further. And I thank you very much for your attention.
Merci beaucoup, Ambroise. Thank you. I want to move quickly now because very interesting how Ambroise said this is a drop in global needs. And we saw this from your poll, 15%, max 15% as a share of water development among public development banks. Katarina Fonseca, senior economist at IRC Wash, does that shock you? I mean, what in your dream-o vision would be that percentage? 50? I don't know. And you're going to talk quickly, I know elevator pitch version, study on the role of these public development banks in financing water. Tell us, please.
Thank you, Chris. I have a timer, so I'm making sure I stay on time.
Bravo. Great. Excellent.
So I will talk about the one-year study that was commissioned by the Agence Française de Développement, and I will just want to highlight to you some of the findings. Can we have some of the slides, please? So while the slides come up. So this study was done really to look at, the main objective was what is the present role of the public development banks in financing water and sanitation. When I say water sector, I say water, sanitation, and all the water related goals of the Paris Agreement, and also biodiversity protection. Next, please. So what we looked with, we really had to look very hard to find the national public development banks and the international finance institutions that were investing in the sector. And you can find in the link below, I will also put it in the chat, the study with all its 13 very detailed case studies as well. Next, please. So the main conclusions are indeed that the public development banks have been underused in the water sector, but there's a lot of potential. They have played a critical role in financing infrastructure, mostly in Europe and Latin America. And where they are not financing the water sector, but they exist, because they exist in almost all the countries in the world, is because they don't have the specific mandate to do so. Next, please. And here's your poll, Chris. Indeed, I mean, but I have to say, this is simply from the sample of the public development banks that are already working in the water sector. So actually, if you would look at a worldwide average, it would be very, very small. And it's predominantly on sewage, wastewater treatment, and they are much less involved in very important areas of the whole supply chain of water, which is water resource management, but also climate change, mitigation, resilience. And we found extremely few examples of investments for ecosystem and biodiversity protection. Next, please. Now, this was very interesting because I think we kept hearing in the water sector that there was really an issue, a supply side of finance. And as Lyonel has mentioned, most of the major issues of why public development banks are not involved in the water sector has to do with the demand side from the sector itself. And I want to focus on, I think, the two that were mostly talked about during our interviews, and it has to do with the historical dependence of the water sector on central government funding. And with the lack, coming with that, the lack of a specific mandate to invest in the water sector. So the public development banks are investing in everything from energy to agriculture, infrastructure, but not in the sector. And because of that, there's much less skills and knowledge from the public development banks to develop projects in those areas. And even when they want to do that, I mean, then we come again to a point mentioned on the lack of financial viability and the operational performance in a lot of the water service providers. Next, please. So I think besides what was mentioned, that all public development banks are providing credit to local governments and utilities, and the main why they're doing this, because they provide the long tenures needed in the sector, much lower interest rates, grace periods. You have most public development banks also working in project preparation and structuring project finance with private sector. And this is not enough in the sector. And so in many countries, you start seeing some public development banks really influencing sector reforms, improving the regulatory framework for allowing more finance to come into the sector and for PDBs to be able to work in the sector. Next, please. This is actually my last slide. I don't want to go through it. I want to just mention, I was asked to talk about, well, what are like the top 3 recommendations? And I would say 4 top recommendations. In the document, you can find case studies on the measures. These were how public development banks have actually implemented measures to overcome the constraints. And I think the top 4 recommendations are really support the policy dialogues and the finance strategies in the sector to implicitly include public development banks. What I found out is that they are, this is my alarm, what they are the most ignored key player in the financing in the sector. Strengthen the support to PDBs capacities to develop projects and the skills in the water sector. Do this related with climate, with the climate narrative that we talked about earlier, and also, I mean, keep working on the financial viability of the water service providers. Thank you. That's the next slide, and I hope to join you in the discussions later. You're muted, Chris.
Bless you. There, I'm back. Bless you. Bless you. Muito obrigado. And very interesting. I think that it's important to point out that the public development banks, yes, they do share in the risk, but they also are more than just a cash machine, right? They are offering expertise in reforms and regulation and things like that, in setting the stage for there to be a public-private deal in building a water project, right? So let me move quickly now to Katarina Koffman, Group Executive of DBSA. And you're ready to give us an example, a concrete example of financial instruments and services. Please, Katarina.
Thank you, Chris. So I can only reiterate that it's very difficult to fund water projects, mainly because it's a very fragmented landscape and very diverse stakeholders. So at the DBSA, which is one of the PDBs that is part of the Water Finance Coalition, what we've done is we analyzed the problem statement and came up with 3 different programs that we thought would answer the immediate needs of the country: a water reuse program, a non-revenue program, and municipal infrastructure funding program. And the reason why we focus on a program as opposed to individual projects is obviously, as mentioned previously by the previous speakers, it provides scale, it provides standardization in terms of contracting and processes, and so it allows municipalities and countries to expedite water security delivery. These structures more or less look the same. There is the usual private sector investment from an equity perspective. We try to crowd in funders from a senior debt perspective and subordinated debt. And then from a PDB perspective, the development finance institutions, the development banks, we bring in concessional funding, which is longer tenors, better pricing, grants that may not be recoverable necessarily, so they don't have to be paid back, and sometimes partial guarantees. It comes in various forms: project loans, like balance sheet funding directly to municipalities and utilities, project finance structuring, and project bonds. I think project prep, and this is not because I run the project prep area at the DBSA, but project prep is probably critical to this, because the genesis of bankability and funding, access to funding, starts with how you develop projects from the start. So you have to keep that in mind from inception of project prep development. The most important part of what we do is coordinating on a program basis. It's a centralized program. So we coordinate that in terms of government stakeholders, private sector stakeholders, looking at regulatory reform. Very important to have political will, as Katarina, our first speaker, mentioned, extremely important. So
indeed,
the national
so
water
it's all in the
program,
preparation. It's all in the preparation, right, Catherine?
Yes.
Can you give us one final sentence here, because I really do have to move on to state of time.
Yes. So lastly, I'd like to say that championship and political will is probably the most critical in delivery. And so the National Water Program in South Africa is actually endorsed at a presidential level. So that means that we can catalyze funding from all over the world, as well as domestic markets.
Wonderful. Catherine, thank you so much. I'm sorry to move on. but thank you very much. Let me move to the Development Bank of Latin America, that's CAF. Sergio Diaz-Granados, Executive President, has a recorded message. Let's listen to him.
As the recently appointed President of CAF, Development Bank of Latin America, it is a privilege to be part of the Financing Common and virtually join this thematic session on water finance. As we are all well aware, a significant amount of capital investment is required to achieve a human right, the Sustainable Development Goal number 6, and the water-related SDG. CAF water strategy is precisely defined under the scope of water security to support countries in the achievement of SDG 6 and water-related SDGs. And such a strategy will be strengthened significantly in the years to come as we recognize the relevance of the water agenda to embark and achieve our ambition to become the Green Bank of Latin America and the Caribbean. In this regard, allow me to stress on three main understandings that you will find with CAF water action in the forthcoming years. First, water and climate are indivisible. Water availability has been reducing as temperature rises, and we observe concerning increase of deforestation and contamination. Therefore, at CAF we are engaged to intensifying our work in promoting green and gray infrastructure, planning and financing to bring cost-effective solutions that are at the same time environmentally friendly and nature-based solutions, and circular economy are part of the equation. Second, sustainable infrastructure requires sound institutions capable to address those challenges. We will continue supporting the enabled environment needed by providing an increasing capacity development in policy making, regulation, and services provision. Water governance is possible when water demands find an accountable state capable of managing them effectively and efficiently. And that is the basis to achieve the integrated water resources management for the economic and social welfare. Third, and last but not least, CAF is engaged in this vision to support countries in a more sustainable COVID-19 recovery and to promote a greener and more resilient growth. To address such challenge, we will strengthen our support to water project readiness, development, and water infrastructure financing. I conclude by saying that this effort requires of all of us working together, governments, development banks, civil society, private entities, all of us who share a more inclusive of sustainable vision. And this is, of course, an invitation to join us in this endeavor. Thank you.
Muchas gracias to Sergio. Moving to Hamid Taufiki of CDG Maroc. Hamid, welcome. You're going to give us an example of patient capital. I can only give you 2 minutes. Can you do that in 2 minutes? Give me an elevator pitch. Is Hamid here? I tell you what, can we move on quickly let's move on quickly to BANOBRAS, a recording by Carlos Mier y Terán, Deputy Director of BANOBRAS. He has a recorded message presenting the Water Finance Coalition's activities over the first year. Please, Carlos.
On behalf of BANOBRAS, I would like to thank you for joining us at this important session on how public development banks can contribute to increase financing for water and sanitation projects and coordinate common actions for climate change and sustainable development. A special thanks to the French Agency of Development, chair of this Water Finance Coalition, and the European Investment Bank to organize this meeting. We just listened to many experts in water finances and in the challenges that we face ahead, and the many good reasons to invest in water and sanitation, which is critical for health, food security, energy generation, flood control, and in general for economic and social development. The Water Finance Coalition brings together international, regional, and national public development banks with the aim of improving finance for water and sanitation in order to achieve the Sustainable Development Goal 6, that is ensuring access to water and sanitation for all. Since its creation almost a year ago, the coalition was structured with the aim of presenting a common voice from public development banks on these issues, A network of these banks has been integrated, and its working group has met to share experiences and best practices for financing the water and sanitation sector in coordination with climate strategies. The Water Finance Coalition contributed with a global study on the role of national public development banks in financing the water and sanitation, SDG 6, as a first step to build knowledge. And it has become evident that more research is needed to explore how the banks can help moving the lines in water and sanitation financing. In conclusion, at the Water Finance Coalition, we believe that the development banks can help improving the institutional change and to achieve real economy outcomes that are required for sustainable and resilient development, connecting policy intentions with real resources on the ground that are consistent with adaptation and mitigation of climate change. All public development banks are welcome to join forces with us. Thank you, and I look forward to achieve our goals.
Our thanks to Carlos. Can we move on now to Marie-Hélène Loison, Deputy CEO of the Agence Française de Développement. Bonjour Marie-Hélène. We can wrap up now after all the voices we heard. Very important to hear from you now, looking forward with this Water Finance Coalition joint declaration in mind. It's kind of a call to action, and I think it's very important. At the very beginning of this declaration, it says you are saddened that not enough is being done, that so many people are being affected by this, and that we need to do more.
Bonjour, Chris. Yes, thank you for animating this debate, and all the speakers have covered really very different topics. It was very interesting, and I think it gives a good overview of all the challenges that we're facing in the sector. So as was said, the Water Finance Coalition was launched a year ago during the first FIC in Paris. And really the idea was how can PDBs join forces to generate more impact and accelerate the achievement of SDGs. And as we heard, this is really very relevant in the water and sanitation sector, because as many different speakers stressed, there is a lot of complementarity among PDBs, and so working together make a lot of sense. Katarina Fonseca presented the study that was done during the first year of activity. And as she said, this study really confirmed what was our initial intuition, in that the PDBs have a lot of potential to do more in the sector, but have been really underused to tackle all the issues. So we take the opportunity of the second Financing Common Summit to launch this joint declaration, which covers basically three aspects. The first aspect is to acknowledge the strong link between water, climate, and biodiversity, because a lot of speakers also stress this is about access to better water and sanitation services, but it's also a lot about working towards climate change adaptation, and also working for biodiversity protection. So this is an essential feature of the work we're doing. The second aspect is to confirm the opportunity for enhanced role of PDBs and call for unlocking public and private financing potential for water and sanitation, because that was also what Mr. Rouve basically stressed, that the public sector needs the expertise and know-how of the private sector, and obviously the private sector needs all what the public sector can bring in terms of financing and enabling environment. And the third aspect is to express our will to continue joining forces in order to share good practices, build knowledge, and lead a dialogue with other stakeholders, including governments. So on behalf of the coalition, I really thank you, all the institutions that are already supporting the declaration, and I encourage all interested PDBs to join us.
Very good, Marie-Hélène. And then I guess very quickly looking ahead, there's the COP26 in Glasgow coming up. Next year, there's going to be the Dakar Water Forum. Very important for the Water Finance Coalition to be present there, right?
Yes, absolutely. These will be opportunities to continue, putting forward the ambitions of the Water Finance Coalition. And I can mention two aspects that will be important to continue working on. The first one is what I mentioned in terms of how we can continue mainstreaming water and sanitation in PDB strategies. We started this debate by this figure of how much water and sanitation represents in the portfolio of PDBs. And we know that if we do more in the sector, we will also do more in terms of supporting what PDBs are doing in terms of climate-related activities and adaptation. The second aspect that will be interesting to continue working on is policy dialogue. Katarina mentioned one of the top recommendations is to work on policy and regulatory dialogue. And so this is something that is really at the heart of our strategy, and also something where international and national regional PDBs can really be complementary in terms of sharing good practices and in terms of putting in the national debate what needs to be done in order to work towards the kind of sustainable regulatory framework that Suez was mentioning. So just a last word to say that of course at AFD we're doing our share in terms of financing the sector and in terms of working towards this enabling environment. We provide about €1 billion of financing in the sector every year. So this is quite essential for water services and sanitation. And as I said, to contribute to our climate and biodiversity objectives. And so to conclude, it is really our goal to continue joining forces and doing more together with other PDBs in order to accelerate the achievements of SDGs. Thank you,
Marie-Hélène,
all of you who contributed to this session.
Thank you so much. Merci beaucoup, Marie-Hélène of the Agence Française de Développement. And thanks to all the other speakers as well for shedding light on this aspect here at the Finance in Common Summit 2021. For those who listened and thought of some sound bites or things to say on this, there's the hashtag Water Finance Coalition and hashtag Finance in Common 2021. Please keep those in mind. My name is Chris Burns. Thanks for joining us on this, and see you next time.